You let them think they won. That was the move, that was the twist they never prepared for. You gave them space to gloat, to brag, to sit on their little thrones carved from your silence. You watched them perform their victory, unaware it was staged by your indifference. They saw your exit as a collapse. They mistook your quiet for defeat. They assumed the game was over, but it wasn't. The game was just beginning, and you had already stopped playing by their rule. What they didn't realize was that you were never after the same prize. You weren't trying to win the argument. You were aiming for something deeper, liberation. And to reach that, you let them believe their illusion. Let them taste the hollow sweetness of an empty win, because sometimes the most powerful move is to look conquered, until they build confidence in the wrong direction. You gave them time to paint the wrong version of you, time to craft stories that made you look bitter, broken, bruised. You let them spread it like gospel. You didn't intervene, didn't correct, didn't try to save face. That restraint, that stillness, it was your razor. Because manipulators don't prepare for silent revolutions. They prepare for fire. And when the fire never came, they relaxed, they exposed themselves. They grew careless. The mask slipped more often, and by the time they realized you'd been watching the whole time, their reflection had already cracked. What you broke wasn't their name, it was their narrative. You broke their comfort in knowing they had your story held hostage. You made them face the horror that the only version of you they conquered was the one you'd already outgrown. You shattered them with patience. No spectacle, no retaliation, just absence. Presence withdrawn like light from a room, leaving them to stumble over the very traps they set for you. They called your distance avoidance, but it was elevation. They called your silence defeat, but it was calculation. You learned that you didn't need to fight a monster to prove it exists. You only needed to stop feeding it. And when you did, when you starved it of validation, of excuses, of your attention, it began to consume itself. That was always the truth about toxic people. They're not fueled by strength. They're fueled by access. Cut the line, and they crumble. Psychologically, you weaponized the most underestimated force in existence: grace. Grace that didn't need applause. Grace that didn't seek revenge. Grace that stayed silent while the lies bloomed and rotted in the mouths of the weak. And when the rot spread, when the weight of their own deceit began to crush them, they looked around for someone to blame. But there was no one left. You were gone. Unreachable. They had built a house of cards using your name. And now the wind, your evolution, ripped it apart. Not because you pushed, but because you left. And people who define themselves by your downfall cannot survive your distance. You didn't destroy them, you disproved them. That's worse, because destruction can be blamed, a villain can be named, but disproving, that leaves no target. It leaves only silence and truth. They saw you thriving in places they swore you'd never reach. They watched your name rise where they tried to bury it. And what crushed them wasn't your success. It was the realization that you succeeded without them, that their name wasn't needed, that their opinion didn't shape your outcome, that they were a comma in your sentence, not the period. And that reality, that was the fracture they couldn't glue back together. Now they live with the noise of their own voice, echoing lies they no longer believe. The noise of people asking about you with admiration, not pity. The noise of memory, sharp and relentless, reminding them who you really were. They can't escape it, because you didn't just disappear, you transformed. And transformation, when witnessed by those who tried to limit you, is violence. A quiet kind of violence, the kind that doesn't leave bruises but scars. Scars on their pride, on their ego, on their delusion of power. They remember your kindness now, and it cuts deeper than your rage ever could have. They broke themselves trying to break you. That's the punchline. That's the irony that twists the knife. They put so much effort into staging your fall, they forgot to look beneath their own feet. And while they laughed, while they gossiped, while they reveled in your retreat, they were standing on a trap door. One you didn't build, but one they opened. You just stepped aside and let them fall through it. You didn't need to deliver karma. You simply let truth arrive on its own timeline. And when it didn't knock. It broke the door down with everything they pretended not to be. They reach for you now in subtle ways. Passive questions, sudden apologies, fake concern. But you see through it all. Because the person who once needed closure has grown past the craving. You no longer need to show them anything. Not your scars, not your growth, not your forgiveness. They already see it, and that's what breaks them. The realization that you could have retaliated, but chose peace, that you could have exposed them, but chose silence, that you had every right to end them publicly, but you let them end themselves in private. Your mercy was the sentence, your silence the signature on their emotional collapse. They broke themselves, trying to break you. That's the irony. That's the slow burn consequence they never calculated. They came with the intention of tearing you down brick by brick, and all the while, they didn't notice their own foundation crumbling beneath them. See, they thought pain was a weapon they could wield with precision. They thought psychological warfare required intelligence, but all it needed was their own ego. They swung recklessly, assuming you'd be the one to collapse. But your silence wasn't surrender. It was insulation. You knew that people who aim to destroy others often underestimate how deeply they're stabbing themselves in the process. You watched them dig the hole. All you had to do was step aside and let gravity handle the rest. You weren't the one yelling. You weren't the one gossiping, manipulating, orchestrating the betrayal. You were the one bleeding quietly behind the scenes, learning exactly how far their cowardice would stretch. And it stretched far. Far enough to wrap around their necks. Because in their desperate attempt to stain your reputation, they forgot one detail. Mud doesn't stick to marble, it clings to the hands that throw it. And now, every word they whispered has looped back like a curse. You didn't need to explain. You didn't need to clear your name. You became the exhibit, not the defense. You outlived the slander, and in doing so, you forced them to sit with the shame they once projected onto you. They needed your destruction. Your fall was their therapy. Your collapse would have validated their mediocrity. But you didn't collapse. You reconstructed. You disappeared from their theater and built your own temple. And when they turned around, expecting to find your ruin, they found a monument instead. Your success wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. And that's what cracked them. Not your revenge, your absence. You removed the fuel. You stopped playing. You didn't beg for understanding, you simply became someone who didn't require their approval. And people who survive by feeding on others can't handle starvation. Psychologically, they didn't break you. They revealed themselves, and that revelation came at a cost. When someone's identity is tied to your misery, your healing becomes their unraveling. They once wore smiles carved from your silence. They once bonded over your pain. Now they choke on it. Because you healed faster than they expected. You found peace before they were done celebrating your suffering. And that timeline, that reversal, it turned their smirks into questions. How did they recover? Why are they still rising? And the truth that you never needed them to begin with is unbearable. They used to measure their power by how much they could affect your emotions. If they could make you cry, they felt relevant. If they could make you explain yourself, they felt victorious. But now, they shout into an echo chamber. They throw stones at someone who no longer even stands in the same room. And what they call indifference, you call clarity. You no longer see them as villains, as chapters. as closed. And that shift, it sliced through the illusion they built around you, because no one expects the person they tried to destroy to smile from a higher place. They underestimated the power of reflection. You weren't reacting because you were digesting. You were processing everything. You were connecting the dots between their actions and their intentions. You saw through their tactics. You studied their patterns. And then you did something they never expected. You outgrew them. You didn't beat them at their own game. You left the stadium. And in that departure, you dismantled the only structure they knew: opposition. Without you to fight, to guilt, to drag down, they collapsed. Their energy was built around trying to control yours. And once you became uncontrollable, their identity fractured. You don't need to rub it in. Your evolution does that for you. You walk into rooms now and they feel smaller, not because you're vengeful, but because you've become so much more than they ever expected. Your energy exposes their limitations without a word, and they feel it, in the silence, in your stride, in your calm. They feel the echo of every lie they told about you ricocheting back into their own bones. They were so focused on making you look broken that they never noticed how many pieces they left trailing behind them. And now they sit with that rubble, unable to blame you for a mess they made alone. This wasn't about revenge. This was about return. You returned to yourself, to the parts they tried to chip away, to the dignity they tried to twist, to the intuition they mocked. And in reclaiming those parts, you reconstructed something unshakable: yourself. They didn't see it happen. They were too busy dancing around your destruction. But now they're forced to watch your presence like a mirror, one that shows them everything they lost trying to break someone they could never own. They now exist in a haze of regret, though they'll never admit it out loud. Not because they feel remorse for what they did, but because they feel haunted by the outcome they never expected. They thought breaking you would buy them peace. They thought turning others against you would keep them safe from their own shadows. But you weren't the threat. You were the mirror. And once you were gone, the distortion vanished with you. What's left now is a brutal clarity, one they can't escape, one they can't outrun. Their game worked only when you stayed in it. The moment you walked off the field, their mask slipped. Now they see each other clearly, and they can't stand the reflection. You didn't retaliate because your evolution made their destruction redundant. What were you going to do? Prove them wrong? That would have meant lowering yourself back into the mud they used to mold your image. No, you did something far worse in their eyes. You prospered without explanation. You thrived without them understanding how. That mystery burns them more than any confrontation ever could. They can't dissect your silence, can't discredit your glow, and in their frustration they begin to spiral. Not publicly, no. They keep smiling, but you can see it now, in their posture, in their tone, in the subtle way their voice drops when your name is mentioned. You live rent-free in the corner of their conscience they've tried to padlock. And the people they once turned against you, they're starting to see it too. Because truth has a strange way of aging well, while lies rot in the open air. Slowly, surely your absence starts to speak louder than their presence. Your peace, your progress, your detachment. It all starts to unravel their stories. The ones who once believed them now sit quieter in conversation. They observe, they compare, they wonder why the person who was supposedly broken walks with such certainty, while those who claim to be righteous twitch under the weight of their own words. You didn't have to tell your side. Life told it for you.